here. We've got people joining quickly, but there's a lot of content to talk about today, so I'm going to get started. This is a pretty hot topic, and I knew that it would be. I'll save you the suspense. I have no perfect answer for this issue. I've got ideas, and I've got a place to start. I've polled some very successful people. I have a guest who recently implemented the system who will talk to us at the end of the information and before questions about her experience, what she found to work and what didn't work. And I have not asked her the questions yet, so we'll see how that went. Hopefully that'll be helpful information to you. We have 100 attendees, our max, so thank you again for taking your lunch hour to be with us. A little housekeeping. Over to the right of your screen, you should see a panel. On the panel are several options. One of those is questions. If you have any issues with sound or video, please let us know. We'll work quickly to rectify that. If you have questions about the content, please ask those as we go. If my staff is monitoring, and if there's a question that needs clarification, we'll take it during the content. If not, we'll stop 15 or 20 minutes before the end to take your questions. Always I find the information and questions from the group to be very useful, and I always get new ideas from the group that's here, and I hope that you will too. I expect that you will. So it's been a year and a half of our webinar series now. We've had a lot of fun. This has been the second most popular webinar after accounts receivable control, neither of which are surprising to me because these are both really tough issues in our industry for a lot of reasons that we'll talk about. Again, I think we will have some concrete ideas by the end. If you don't have a system in place about how you might get started, I have what I love is the ultimate system, which I'll tell you, but sometimes that takes a little working into, and we'll just get started with the content now. So, first of all, what I would like to be able to do is change the slide. Okay, there we go. So let's talk about why we want to have a bonus plan. Obviously, these are going to be very self-explanatory. You guys know what they are. They're why you're here. The first thing you want to do is you want your employees to do the right things consistently, and you want them to be rewarded for that. Getting those systems set up and properly motivating people without demotivating people, which bonus systems can do if they're not done properly, built around the right things and communicated properly, they can actually have the opposite effect of what you're trying to achieve, which is to motivate people, to get them to make the right decisions, and for them to be rewarded, because we're successful when they're successful, and I know how people feel about their managers. I'm going to consistently use the term managers. I find that most people who have a system obviously reward their director. A lot of people also include directors in that mix, and I don't have any that do regular employee bonuses if they're not tied to something like Christmas or some type of discretionary bonus. But when I say managers, I'm typically speaking of directors and assistant directors. The second thing it does is that it helps the employee understand what your goals are for them individually and for your company, because it really forces you into a system where you are required to give them very specific, measurable performance goals. You can't say things any longer like, we need to increase performance, you need to decrease salaries, you need, it requires you to help them understand exactly what you're trying to achieve, because bonuses have to be measured, and what gets measured gets done. So that's a benefit. The third thing is, I just alluded to, is that it also trains your employees in basic financial concepts. As we all know, our directors are very rare, as are we, very rarely financially, well, we very rarely have a financial background. And so to teach financial concepts to a person who's typically an educator is a challenge that a lot of people have. And so we try to keep it, and I find this is the basic challenge with bonus systems, to keep it meaningful and understandable but not so complicated that the employee has no idea what they can do or what it means. I use this example frequently that somewhere along the way of my, on July 5th, 30-year history in the industry, we acquired some schools from a national operator, and the directors got pretty significant bonuses at times, but I never will forget them saying, we get a check or we don't. There's a piece of paper with it that we look at it and go, yeah, I don't know what that means, but the paper goes in the trash and the bonus check goes in the bank, and we never knew what we did or didn't do to make that work. So money wasted. Might as well just give them a salary and move on with it. So it does force you to have good systems in place to train those employees, not only on what they mean, but what they can do that would make a difference. It forces the integrity of your financial data, because believe me, once people are rewarded or not rewarded based on that financial data, they will let you know if it's not correct. And so if you're a multi-site operator, it forces you to be a little more careful about how expenses get recorded from school to school, about how revenue gets recorded, and it will improve the accuracy of your data. More eyes on it, people who have a vested interest. And then, in my opinion, it keeps very motivated, progressive team members in your company. So people who are willing to take some risk along with you, people who are motivated by seeing the results of their work financially, those are the types of people you want on your team. And those people, once you set systems up like that, that they feel good about, it really helps with retention of people. So let's see what successful plans look like. First of all, they're specific and they're in writing. They're understood, they have measurable goals, and they're presented to people in writing. They're tied to performance standards. So most companies will have performance standards. They're often not specific and measurable. Think about that like I can check it off the list. If I can mark it off a list when it's done, then it's specific and measurable. If I can't, then I need to rethink that a little bit. The third thing is that, in my opinion, they are a substantial part of the employee's salary. They're not a couple of $100s at the end of the quarter. And I'm going to talk to you in just a minute about some successful systems I've seen and how they got implemented, because if you do make those very substantial, I'm not talking about the directors now at this salary and you're going to substantially bonus 30% above that. I'm talking about putting 30% of their current salary at risk, and I know that's a scary term to use, so you might want to change that before you communicate it, but to shift part of what you pay in salary to money that they can earn because of their performance and then some. So I think that they're a substantial part of the person's compensation package. Most companies, there's kind of an average of 10% of employees' pay is at risk. I know a company in our industry that goes to 30%. Some of them that I see, yeah, but most that I see are probably 10 to 20 at the most. But I do know one that's 30, and they've done it very successfully. So the bonuses also are reviewed and received timely. You don't want to have a big lag between the end of the period that you're reviewing and the time that you sit down and talk with these people and give them their money. So that also forces you into a system where financial statements are produced timely and accurately. I think I love them done period to period, and I don't say monthly to monthly, because if you guys have listened to me before, I prefer 13 4-week financial statements over 12 monthly ones. That's a different workshop, but ask me that later if you want more explanation of that. At least quarterly, though. I do know some people that do them annually, but they seem to be more discretionary. And I'd like to speak to that just for a second. in my opinion, discretionary bonuses, and by discretionary I mean the owner just says, we think you've done a really good job, we're going to give you $1,000. I think they can be a little demotivating for people who really enjoy the process of knowing that they have some measure of control over their livelihood. They feel a little, well, they're arbitrary. They also feel like somebody else is controlling your life, and might be a little demotivating to some people who would prefer to make it happen on their own. The last one, and I kind of put this in there hesitantly and almost took it out, but I saw a lot in writing about it. Some companies like a process that handcuffs the employee to the business. In other words, it encourages them to stay in the business. First of all, I think that the fact that you have a bonus plan in place itself encourages people to stay. But some of the ways that people did this was that if they set up a bonus plan, half of it would get paid on the schedule that they designated. The other half would vest over a certain amount of time. So it would accrue and vest. Once the employee had been there 5 years, they would get it, things like that. Again, I'm really more of a fan of thinking that if you do this correctly, it's motivation in itself. But that is something to think about if that's something that you're trying to achieve in your company. Okay, why do some plans not go well? First of all, when I give you the ultimate plan here shortly, of course, again, my opinion of the ultimate plan, I think that there's certain processes and cultures that you need to have in place before you consider doing what I will say, and then I'll give you a place to start, like I said. But some of these things are that the company strategy, where is the company going, what are we trying to achieve, it needs to be fully developed and explainable to your team. And so if you haven't invested in regular strategic planning sessions, preferably with your team, that have goals and objectives that are specific and measurable, again, you can mark them off the list. That's a very valuable process. I would suggest using someone outside of your company. There are people who do this for a living, but there are other people who are just really good at it. If you know someone who can take your team through that process and get to a 3 to 5 year vision. Actually, some people are moving now to a 1 to 3 year vision because the world is changing so quickly, especially ours. But that needs to be in place. The second thing is that it forces you to be sure that your managers are trained in best practices, because it's one thing to say, we want you to achieve a bottom line of 10% or greater, and obviously by doing that, your salary control has to be within a range and your food costs have to be within a range. But if they don't know how to do that, then you've just set up a very frustrated manager. So it forces you to be sure that the best practices are in place and well articulated to your employees so that they know what to do when the numbers are not correct. So first of all, they need to know what the correct numbers are and that they're not correct if they aren't, and then what to do about it. The third one is that if not set up correctly, or in some cases the actual system itself can encourage negative behaviors on the part of staff. And I'm going to point some of those out to you, some things to look out for when you set this system up. This could be a negative behavior for that. So it might, and this is a positive thing actually, it might force you in a different way to monitor other things. So I'm going to table that for right now because I'm going to get back to that in a more concrete way in just a minute. It also forces you into a regular employee performance evaluation process. This is something we're is the first thing to go when it's, you know, we're in the middle of employee hiring crisis and licensing is in and somebody's performance review is due and we just don't get to it. But along with the other functions of their job to get reviewed, or you can pull those in with the financial review system, you really have to have a good system in place where you sit down and you talk about these things and you counsel and you mentor and you train and you start over again. So that process has to be in place. The next thing is that financial systems, again, have to be accurate, timely, and measurable. And I'm a fan of this. If you've listened to me at all, I'm a big fan of this anyway. We have an example of a financial statement format that we love. It's something that I've worked with and developed over probably the last 20 years or so. It's a model of what a financially healthy school should look like. We give this to people in Excel form. If you would like it, just email us. We're happy to send it to you. But I think you can use it or some system that's consistent and producing financial statements regularly that makes sense to people. We're happy to help you with that if that's a need. And then the last, I also brought this up a minute ago, that the system has to be fully explained to people, reviewed regularly, and then corrective action taken. So let's talk about plan implementation. If we were just starting a new company, it would be so simple for me to say to you, let's take this financial pro forma. This is what we expect your school or schools to look like. This is what we're going for on the bottom line. This is the plan we're going to put in place. We're going to reward people, boom. Well, that's typically not the case. So more often than not, companies have no plan in place and they would like to implement a plan. So how do you get from here to there? One of the things that I heard, I mentioned that I had a client company whose bonus is 30% of their director pay, but they made a switch over a year-long period to where they shifted 1/3 of the current pay from a salary guaranteed type program to a bonus program that was based on financial parameters in the school. Well, you can imagine how this went over immediately. Not very good. You've got a lot of concerned people who have mortgages and husbands and children and are not used to that type of pay system. So it was quite a challenge to implement initially. So what they did was they said to their employees, we're going to put this system in place. For the first year, we will guarantee you your salary. So if you don't get to the bonus range, you will know why. You will be tracking. We will be talking to you. You will understand. And not only that, we will guarantee that you will get that amount of money. But, oh, by the way, you can also get this amount of money. And so they had nervous people. But over the course of the year, they began to see, here's what I actually made. Here's what I could have made. Here's how it all went. And at the end of the year, they had 24 directors. They didn't lose any directors. I will say that after they've done that, they've had a few challenges in hiring new people who didn't immediately understand this system, and it made them nervous, and they've had to do a little work there because it's a pretty significant shift. They have found it to be incredibly positive. They believe that it has retained high quality people. They think it's improved their financial reporting standards. For all the reasons we talked about, they think it's been a phenomenal plan. But to get from here to there is challenging. Also, if you have systems in place, let's assume you have one school and you want to reward your manager, you might have embedded in that financial statement some things that are personal, some things that are presented differently for tax reasons. For instance, maybe you pay an overinflated rent to yourself and another organization. Maybe you pay yourself a management fee that then pays your expenses. Maybe you have your health care and your salary and things you might not choose to have your director privy to. It would just require that you made a shift in your financial statement presentation so that you eventually show that director a financial statement of the school and its operations as if it was an independently operating school without the excess things that go along with the owner that you might not necessarily want them to see anyway. This is also something that we could help with. Again, the financial model that we have that is for an operating school only could help you. If you don't want to go to that extent, then there's some different ways that you can accomplish a bonus, and I'll talk about those in just a minute. But some of these may require that you start simply. So I'm going to give you my ultimate plan and my place to start plan, but that you start simply, and I would encourage you to start somewhere. You're going to find it some things about it to be a challenge at first. You'll figure out what works for your people. You will want to work into other things, but get started somewhere. And then as you shore up your systems and other processes, you can move to closer to what I'm going to tell you is the Kathy pick. So plan implementation can be tricky initially. Okay, what factors to measure? These are not going to be surprises to you guys. We know what the key factors are that create financial success in a school. And the number one is just the bottom line. What I like to call center contribution is if the center was operating as a fully independent school, again, without extra charges of owners or management fees or over market rent that you might be paying to yourself, then the bottom line of the school almost encompasses every factor that the director has control of. It encompasses the revenue, which of course is the enrollment, and without enrollment there is nothing else works. We know that. So the most important factor is how well enrolled the school is. If the house is in order, typically enrollment will be great. So it also encompasses all of the expenses, so everything that's controllable or not. So to base your bonus on the very bottom line of the financial statement for that center's performance is my favorite. It takes into account everything except one thing that I'm going to mention second. If you're on a cash basis system, then it doesn't really matter. Okay, I'm going to backtrack on that. So what it doesn't encompass is the second thing, which could be collection of parent tuition. So often people will build in something that is a negative from the bonus if collections are not made. I'm not a real big fan of negative consequences, things that you take away from a bonus. It's hard not to, though. So if it's going to be based on the bottom line and you're an accrual-based company, or you don't constantly manage accounts receivable, then you might want some system in place that also, maybe you get half bonus if the collections are at this level and full bonus if they're not. But you really need to watch that, because that can be a negative consequence of just focusing on either net income or enrollment. Because if we're not asking parents for their money, it's easy to enroll people, right? So that brings us to the third one, which is a very simple place to start based on enrollment. I would suggest that you use full-time equivalents or FTEs instead of just bodies in the building, because again, you can get to a part-time child or a after school. So part-time children need to be a half an FTE and full-time need to be 1 FTE, and so you calculate your full-time equivalents that way, and then base the bonus on the change in enrollment. And we'll show you that in just a minute. Labor expense is another factor you could couple with enrollment. Of course, if you're basing it on the net income, then labor expense comes into play there. And I want to talk just a minute about other factors. A couple of so I polled several companies, and I got a wide variety of plans that are in place. And just know that no one thinks they have the perfect, well, I'll take that back. Okay, so there's one person that thought they had the perfect plan. That's going to be my ultimate plan, but tough to get to, but I'll explain that. But I heard things from several like, if there's a licensing issue, then that negatively affects the bonus. Or if there's an issue with staff management, that negatively affects it. Just in my opinion, I would try to keep your bonus plan simple and related only to financial issues. If those other things are a factor, then they're probably not going to be successful on the bottom line anyway, and you should be managing that in a different way, not with a bonus system. Just my opinion. A lot of people do it, so I'd love some feedback from somebody else who has a system like that in place. Okay, so let's talk about a place to start. I think that if you don't have a plan in place, then I'd like for you to get started somewhere And let me present to you the simplest way to get started. So before we look at this, you can look at the screen, but let me tell you one that's a little simpler. The most basic plan that I heard from a larger multi-site company is that they bonus directors $100 every time a new child enrolls, and they remove $50 every time a child disenrolls for any reason. And I know your logic there. The first thing the director is going to say is so-and-so moved, and I can't help that. Well, that's true. But several so-and-sos are going to move during the year, and you have to enroll more than to make up for that. So if you buy into that, I can't help if they disenroll, then you're never going to get anywhere net. So a couple of holes in this that are obvious right off the bat. One thing is that, again, it does not account for factors that might be negatives. You need another process for carefully managing discounts. If the director has the ability to discount it all, it's a bit easier to enroll if you are discounting. How long does the person need to stay? You know, if they only stay a week, did you bonus them $100 and then remove $50 and the director still got $50? You need to be careful with collection of accounts receivable because, again, it's easy to enroll and keep people if we don't make them pay their money. And you need to have a system for managing staff expenses. But that is a very simple system, and it's a way that you could get started. The one that I've presented here is also based on FTEs, but a little more comprehensive. So what I've said here is that a place to start would be a plan that a certain % of the current salary is performance-based. So I said before that I liked 10 to, I've seen 30%, but I went with 20 here. So let's assume your director's making $50,000 and you want to put 20% of that at risk. That's 10,000 of their annual dollars that is now performance-based. And in my example, I have said that then you put a plan in place that bonuses them at different levels based on the change in the FTEs. So if we're looking at this quarterly and we say that their baseline is the $10,000 that you just made performance-based, so that's $2,500, that's potential bonus at the very bottom line, which it starts at zero change. So as long as they don't go backwards, they're still making their bonus. So from 0 to 2 FTEs increase, they get their regular bonus of $2,500, which was before a part of their salary. And you can make these numbers anything you want. I just made this up, okay? So I'm just trying to give you an example of a place to start. If they really kick it in gear and they go from 3 to 5 FTE increase, then I increased that 20% to 25%. So instead of $2,500, they now got $3,125 for that quarter. And then 6 to 10, I kicked it up even a little higher. So what I'm trying to say is that the part of their current salary you designate as performance-based money, if they're in good shape, they just need to be able to maintain that good shape to reach that money. But as they improve, they need to be able to improve significantly. If you do the math on what it does for your company and your bottom line for them to increase 6 to 10 FTEs, and you've just shifted $1,200 over to that manager, believe me, you've made a lot more money than that off of those FTE increases. Things to look out for here, again, I said this twice I think already, but I can't say it enough. This system, if you're not monitoring correctly, could also cause negative issues with salary overspending, tuition collection, or discounting. So point is that if you have to start somewhere, start with a very simple change in occupancy, change in enrollment, change in FTEs. Be sure that your director reports this and tracks it weekly because you want them to know. It shouldn't be a surprise when it's bonus time why they did or why they didn't get one, and you need to be in there helping them, giving them the tools they need to affect that enrollment, and constantly talking about it. That will make for a successful plan. Okay, let me tell you a couple of the other plans that I heard before I got to the ultimate plan. There were, so I had that one. Then I had the other 4 multi-site companies, all based the basic plan on the bottom line of that school in varying ways. So one of them based it on the bottom line only. One of them, but that one also did some negative things associated with it if some staffing issues or licensing issues were not in place. One of them did a negative bonus amount if accounts receivable were not in place, which I think you should do if you don't have a system that monitors that. But here is my ultimate one. So there are a lot of things that you have to know about this company to know that this is where I would love people to head. This company had a culture of empowerment for their directors. They gave them almost full reign on spending. They hired really good people, but they trained them really well. They coached them really well. And they set up a system that people were motivated by. And I have to be honest, when I heard the system in my head, I was thinking, oh, I can see a problem there, and I can see a problem there, and you will too. So let me talk through it and tell you how it went. And then what I heard from the owner was none of those things were a problem. But okay, so first of all, the bonus is based on the bottom line performance of the school. Again, center contribution, that affects everything that happens within your school. This particular company was on a cash basis financial system. And when I say, what about collections? He said, if they didn't collect their cash, they didn't get a bonus on it. So at the end of the quarter, I said, well, you've got this $2,000 out there that you haven't been paid. You realize that if you collected that, you were going to get 10% of it. If you don't collect it, you get 0. And all of a sudden, directors went out to make their collection. But as far as he was concerned, that was their school, and if they didn't collect it, they didn't collect it. I think that's given a lot of control to directors, worked well for them. And so, you know, I think in a perfect world, if you have that type of culture and people motivated by it, you can do that. If you have an accrual basis system, you really have to have a system in place to monitor those. So you want directors tracking those. You want them tracking them anyway, and you want to stay on top of it. But they didn't so much worry about it. They just based it on the bottom line, center performance, with the director getting 10% of that amount and the assistant director getting 5% of that amount. But they took it a step further, which I thought was very interesting. They had schools in groups of 5. You know, their regions. Most people will have 8 to 10 in a region. But in a region, in this case, really needs to be schools who can directly collaborate somehow. Maybe they don't have to be physically close enough to each other to help each other out, but they need to be able to collaborate somehow. So he calculated in total for those 5 schools. So he took the net income of the 5 schools, he multiplied it by 10%, and each director got 1/5 of that. Immediately I went, what about the one that didn't pull their weight? And what about the one that made the most money and was there every day? And he said, one of 2 things happened. Either they jumped in immediately to help each other, which was more the norm than anything else, that they saw this person struggling in a certain area and they realized that it was affecting them financially, and they jumped in there immediately to help. Or if that didn't work, they pointed it out to me quickly so that I could get it under control. And if that person doesn't make changes or offer to help other people, I should be making a change anyway. And he was quick to make changes. I think that's one of our problems in this industry, that we want to mentor and help people and bring them along. And a lot of times we really know we probably don't have the right person in there. But this system forced that change and did not become an issue. It was almost a self-managed system. Again, the thing to look out for in this is a tuition collection. You just have to be careful about that one with whatever system you set up that parent balances are being collected. So again, with that system, I like it of all the plans that I heard for a lot of reasons. It creates a culture of teamwork. It creates a culture of empowerment. It's easy because it's based on one number. It encompasses everything in the school except maybe accounts receivable. And I like the simplicity of it. I think some of the other plans that I saw were difficult to understand. There was one that was not only based on the bottom line, but also on a labor percentage and an FTE change and a bonus reduction. I've got this page of formula, and I'm an accountant, and I didn't get it. So if I don't get it, your directors are not going to get it. So simple, understandable, measurable, motivate the right things, create a culture of empowerment and sharing with your team. Those are the things that I like in the system. So I am going to invite my good buddy, Alita Mechtel, to join me. She has so generously offered to talk about the plan that she has in place and how she put it in place, what things went well. Hi. And what things might be a challenge. And again, like I said, I don't know the answers to my questions yet. And she operates a very good school. I would also like to say thank you because I call it a vacation. She says she never really gets a vacation, and you guys can relate to that because we never actually go on vacation. But I appreciate you taking the hour to join us, Alita. Thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So would you take just a minute and tell our participants here about yourself and your schools and what you do?
Okay. So I have owned Children of Tomorrow Learning Centers for 16 years, opened my second location 9 years ago. And 3 years ago, I opened Teachers for Tomorrow, which is a substitute teacher placement company. I just wanted to stop living that director nightmare of all the staff calling in or not being able to accommodate when they were asking off. So I wanted to make sure that I wanted to have a big enough sub pool as well as earning some extra cash flow. And it's been very successful, and it's really taken off in the last 7 months. And I'm getting a lot of contacted by a lot of center directors, center owners, teachers for possibly franchising, and I do not want to franchise, but what I am doing is I created an operations system for Teachers for Tomorrow to have your own substitute teacher placement company. And I call it my business in a box because when it's presented to whoever purchases it, it will be the whole company written all for you to run your own successful company as well.
Fabulous. So in addition to her 2 schools, she has this other business that not only makes your school stronger, but makes you more. Yeah. Okay. Love it. So can I invite people to email me if they'd like to get connected with you? Because that's, yeah.
Sure.
Fabulous idea, and I'm sure I'm hearing a lot about that right now. Staffing is tough, always has been tough, but probably a little more so right now than in the past. So your 2 schools are in Minneapolis, and I've had the pleasure of visiting them, and they're beautiful. And you recently implemented a plan. So tell us about why you did that.
Well, I think we've spent so many years marketing, and at this point we are so full and our waiting list is so long that we've kind of lost touch with the quality control and quality capacity in the locations. And so I wanted to put into play a system and an operations for my directors and assistant director to make sure that they're covering everything I believe in my heart would be successful in their day-to-day at the center. And what this has done is not only created a great bonus plan for them, but actual clarity of what needs to be done each and every day and what the expectations are every month running a center. And if they follow these expectations, and this is what they do, then there's really, everything's covered. And I have 7 different areas. I have family care and self-care. I look at the center as a whole, marketing, budget, and director and assistant director are able to get the same bonus. So they work very hard each and every day at completing this checklist. What I did was I created a rubric, so they have a point system. They know exactly where everything lays within point systems. Everything is a percentage. I rolled it out as a PowerPoint to everyone all at once. We went over expectations. We went over the points, the dollar amounts, when we were going to give the reviews. We go over the point system. The first Monday, the payroll Monday of every month. And so then by Wednesday, we discuss it, we talk about it, we meet, and then by Wednesday it goes on their payroll for that week. So they get a bonus, whatever it is they get. So in my family area, I have Parent Connections, the newsletter, family retention plan that we created, any family concerns that they're going to discuss, tour to enrollment funnels. I'm a big advocate of gaining more knowledge, so self-care is important to me, making sure that the director and assistant director each month get some kind of training to better themselves. Children's care, just making sure that their classroom is organized, clean, everything is developmentally appropriate, meaning all the supplies are in there, the curriculum is followed. When I walk in, I can tell that it's a toddler room versus a pre-K room. The center as a whole, I want to make sure that the drills are being done, the fire drills, the tornado drills, the lockdown drills. There's a Friday wrap-up that I want given out to the teachers. Is it thematically decorated? What's the curb appearance, the entrance appearance? The non-classroom organization, which is the supply room, the evil supply room, the laundry area, the staff lounge, is it taken care of when I walk in? Monthly maintenance, and the big one is my NACCE visit walkthrough, and that's a big chunk that I feel is very important. If we're accredited, we need to run accredited every month. And every day, and so I've hired someone to walk through each month unannounced and go through the big NACCE walkthrough. And then my marketing, I'm a big, largely involved in the community. So they need to go to one community event each month, and they also need to get testimonials and place them everywhere on Facebook and their taglines everywhere. So I need to know where they're placing them, what those testimonials are, how they're using them. The budget, they have to watch capacity, tuition audits, visa allocations, their actual spending versus the budget that we've set up. And then staff, what are they discussing in their monthly meeting? Are they fully staffed? Are the schedules getting out on time? Are they empowering their staff, making sure the reviews are done? We put in to make sure that full orientation for the whole week is completed with all the new staff members. I look at this, I've been implementing this since January. It's been quite amazing. It's driving them for success. It's supporting them in every way. We communicate the expectations every month. They're very competitive with each other, actually, but it's great. It's awesome. It's awesome. And the assistant directors are doing really well, assisting and partnering with the directors.
Did you initially hear some concerns when you started to put the plan in place?
So the only concern that we had was on a couple of these areas. They said, well, we're never going to be able to hit this. And I said, well, I don't ever want you to say never. The staffing, are we ever going to be fully staffed? And, one school got there, and they're very proud of that. But I don't ever want them to sell themselves short, and I always want them to reach for higher. And if I have to mix this up a little bit and put some more things on here or remove things, it's flexible, and it's about discussing it with them too. If they're falling short or if they're, getting all the percentage, 100% every single month, well, let's take it off of there and put something else on there.
Sure. So you were able to assign a point value to things that very specific things. You have this or you don't. It wasn't,
Yeah.
our
Yes.
parents happy because you don't know how to measure that. And there were specific things that they had to accomplish to get the points.
Well, with each section of this, they click on the area on the rubric, and it brings them to the log or the spreadsheet or whatever it is that they have to fill out. And they're filling out some items each month, so I can see. You know, some of it is just the dates that they did the drills. You know, it's just they're putting the dates in there. But for them, it's a tool to help look back. What have I completed? What still needs to get done? I walk through every month. I compare my notes with their notes. I mean, I'm in there more than once a month, but it really helps me gain some knowledge on each classroom. Are they living up to my expectations? Are the teachers living up to the director's expectations? Is everything clear? Are we all on the same page? It's really created clarity in my centers.
And now that you've been through the process for, I guess, you're doing this quarterly.
I'm monthly.
Monthly. So you've been through it 4 months already.
Yes.
Any big holes in the system, or is it basically you're pretty happy with it?
I think, you know, I would change a couple things, and we have changed a couple things. We went in there for the first year of let's use this as a moving target all the time, and it needs to be flexible. They need to be flexible because I may have questions, they have questions, but it really gives us to that when we meet. We meet for an hour and a half each month.
Wow.
On this.
And it forces that meeting. I like that about it.
Yeah. And I mean, we talk about everything that needs to be discussed to make a center run appropriately. And I know the very first part of it, my concern was, am I going to have enough money to give them this bonus? And I have to keep reminding myself and telling everyone else that I work with and train, you know, if all these things are in place and this is going well and your capacity is here and this is the expectation, you're going to have plenty of money to give them bonuses. So it's just shifting your mind in a way that, you know, if all of this is in place and they're hitting these numbers, that's where you're going to be.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was fabulous. So will you hang on just a minute? Let's take some questions because I'm sure there might be some questions for you.
Sure.
Okay, so we have about a little less than 10 minutes here, so we can, if you guys will look over to your right-hand panel bar, there's a panel for questions. Got a couple in there, so let me see what they are. Okay, go a little more into the math of the expense of the bonus versus the gain that you might get from enrolling a new FTE. Assume the bonus is paid on 3 new FTEs at your number of $31.25, and my average tuition rate is $200 a week. Okay, I might have to do a little math here on that one. Good question though. So let's just say that, you know, you bonus at a new level at 3 FTEs, and it's quarterly, and your tuition rate is $200. You know, at a certain level of occupancy, nearly 100% of that $200 flows directly to the bottom line. But let's say it's even 50% of that $200. So if you got 3 new FTEs over that quarter, a quarter is 13 weeks. So 3 new people times 13 weeks times $200 is a revenue gain of $7,800. Let's assume that you put half of that to the bottom line. Then I would argue that it was really more than that. Then your school gained $3,900. In my example, the director went from $2,500 in bonus to $3,125 in bonus. So of the $3,900 that you gained, the director gained $625, which is 16% of what you actually made. So again, I think I'm being pretty conservative on my numbers. Unless your occupancy is low, if you're hitting the 60 to 70% occupancy mark, typically your staff is in place, your building's paid for, obviously. You start, most of that money flows right to the bottom line, and at the most people think once your management's in place, even if you have to add more staff members, typically 25% of that would be new expenditures. So I'm being pretty conservative in saying that I think the director's portion of what you made is about 16%. Let's see, yeah, that would be helpful. It's small on my screen. I'll get over here. How do you bonus in your numbers when throwing in an allocation of G&A? Good question. So some companies, well, there are a couple of things you can do. Some G&A or overhead. Some people will add in a management expense line into their center financial statements, and then their G&A comes out of that. Some people will leave them directly in the financial statements. Some people do a complete separate financial statement and don't show it at all. I think the change there is just going to be the percent that you use. So you can see that a lot of people, in my example, use 10% of the bottom line for directors or 5% for assistant directors. You might have to change that number if you've got some G&A built in. I kind of would back into the percentage based on the portion of their pay that you want to come from bonus, and what you want that number to be, really. So in my example, we wanted them to bonus at least $10,000 just from holding the situation the same, and then you want them to get more from that. So you might have to back into that percentage. If you've got a specific example you want to shoot over to me later, I'd certainly be happy to give you an opinion. What percent should be charged back for accounts receivable over 30 days? Good question. A lot of people will have different parameters for what they find to be acceptable accounts receivable. This is a little soapbox for me, so acceptable accounts receivable to me is 0. And then you have to ask the question about, do prepaid accounts or negative accounts take away from what parents owe you? So are we talking about the net of the prepaids and the accounts receivables, or are we just talking about accounts receivable? What do you find acceptable? What are you okay with? Most of the people that I've talked with will do something like 3 to 5% of the revenue in receivables at a certain time is manageable. A lot of times you will have a family with a certain situation that you need to work with, not to get on the soapbox, but only work with families when they're talking to you, they're communicating clearly, and you have a plan in place. And then they'll give the director half of the bonus if they're outside that range, or full bonus if they're not. Alita, do you have a different parameter for that, or another answer?
Yeah, we don't have any challenges with that because everybody's on automatic ACH, so we zap everything straight up, and we don't have collections really.
Yeah, the rest of us hate you right now. Yeah, so that's fabulous, and thank you for bringing that up, because I do have to say that so many schools, when they're in the right place, some different demographic markets don't work that way, but when you can be in the right market to switch to automatic ACH, it's your life is so much easier. It's really, of course, you know, there's not an occasional issue because someone had an overdraft and you didn't get your payment, or they changed their account, or there's typically something to follow up on, but much less. Okay, so here's a question for you, Alita. How do you assign a point system to something that's not easily counted, like keeping the laundry room clean, versus, you know, something that can be quantified with $1?
It is or it isn't. It's a yes and no. And, you know, it's very clear what my expectations are. We have a system. It needs to be followed. When I walk in, I don't want to see laundry on the floor or in the baskets that should be put away. And we share the laundry with our kitchen. So it's either yes or no, and it's when I walk in and this is what I see. If they're telling me it's all being followed and I walk in and it's not, it's what I see, not what they're
Okay. In some cases, do you ever have a conversation about the difference in opinion of what's clean and what isn't, or is that pretty well defined?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But that's where, you know, you have like your operations manual. That's where this all started, this bonus, because I'm in the middle of almost finished with my operations manual for Children of Tomorrow, and this is a big part of it. And you know, this bonus covers a lot of areas of how the school should run, and the teachers are on board, the directors, assistant directors, curriculum instruction managers, everybody's on board. It's all in the operation manual, the expectations.
Fabulous. Thank you. In your example for bonuses, what happens if a director worked hard for 1 year and gets 30 new FTE? I'm missing the bottom part of that question. Let me see if I can scroll over here. Give me just a second. Yep, that might be the end of the question. Okay. I'm going to guess what the end of that was. No, the second year they would have to keep those same numbers. Now there's a little upside and much more downside, especially if you were up. Okay, good question. So here's the question. Took me a minute to scroll to the bottom. So if a director works hard in a year, they get 30 new FTEs. The next year, how do they keep a change going, and how do they keep that bonus? There's a little upside and more downside, especially if you're at 80 to 90% capacity. I completely agree. And there are definitely some holes in this FTE. So let me speak to some of that. One might be that you have a brand new school, and obviously FTEs are going to be growing really quickly, and FTEs might not make sense in that case. Another hole in that system is that you're completely full or you're near completely full, and changing FTE is meaningless. In that case, you really have to move pretty quickly down the process to something that more fully rewards, at minimum, the bottom line, which does encompass not just FTEs, but it encompasses tuition rate increases and continued cost containment. And as that number strengthens, then your director is bonused better and better. So in that case, an FTE system alone would probably be quite a challenge. So there, you know, again, I'm not sure that I know anyone that says I have a system that's perfect. What I like about Alita's is that it does quantify a lot of things that you want to change or maintain behavior in, and that's good. At the very least, a more comprehensive financial bonus based on things other than just FTE would have to be in place at that point. But good question. Let's see if we have time for maybe one more. Okay, so what if, okay, so another hole in FTE, so somebody's pointing out to me here, and I realized all of these, so this is why I'd like you to get started somewhere, knowing that there's some issues. There's some natural changes in our cycle for our businesses, and FTEs are going to grow naturally in the fall. So let's say we have a school which is typical, that you have a medium-sized after-school group that will come in the summer, but your fours have left, and then those after-schoolers become half FTEs, and then they come in the summer and they're full again. You have these natural cycles of changes in FTEs, and everybody knows January to May is great. So there's certain things that happen in the cycle of the school that naturally affect FTEs from one quarter to the next that might go up or down. And so if you just do it on a change in FTEs, and if it's just a positive change in FTEs, then what happens the next quarter if they go backwards and then they don't go forward again? So there are a lot of, I think the change in FTE would work best if you had a school at 50 to 70% occupancy and you really wanted to motivate them to get themselves full. and then you probably need to be working on your internal systems to get to a more comprehensive program that rewards other things and also takes into account expense control and revenue. So I think that's a simple way, but again, there could be some issues with that one unless you couple it with other things. Fabulous questions. We're at 2 o'clock, and I know you guys need to go take care of children. We appreciate your participation. Our next workshop is scheduled for July 21st. It will be the beginning of probably a 2-part series on succession planning. I have another guest speaker who has started his succession plan from his company. And we hope that will be fun. Send us any questions that you have. Forward me any questions for Alita, or if you'd like to get connected with her and learn more about what she's doing with her substitute company. I'm fascinated by that too. I know a lot of people who would love you right now. So we'll have to learn more about that. And thank you again for taking your time to be with us, Alita, and all of our participants.
Thank you.
See you soon.